Hey, Justin. How you guys doing? Bob, Curtis, John, Todd, the King, Takeshi, all our friends. Very nice. Coach Smedley, how are you? Rhonda. All right. Hi, Coach. All right. Let us get started, shall we? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Yard. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's 7:03 p.m. in Houston, Texas right now. Uh,
Yep.
Everybody in Houston knows that can only mean one thing. It's time for another episode of The Yard. In addition to broadcasting through our Zoom channel, we are simultaneously on Facebook Live, Twitter, and YouTube. And of course, if you're interested in checking out past episodes, go to YouTube, type in Commissary Club, and you'll see all of the past episodes. Aside from the fact that Beyonce and Walter Cronkite both grew up in Houston, it's also the home of our guest tonight, who we'll meet in a second. The Yard, of course, is a production of Commissary Club, which is the first social network for 70 million Americans who have criminal records. My name is Richard Bronson. I'm the founder and CEO of Commissary Club, as well as 70 Million Jobs, the national employment platform for folks with records. Tonight, I am joined by my good friend and teammate and perennial All-Star, NBA All-Star. Of course, we're talking about Seth Sundberg.
So, Richard,
One of the sweetest jump shots for a 7-footer in the game.
that's the closest thing to truth out of all of that sentence, actually. That whole thing, that perennial NBA All-Star, like I did, yeah, good shoot. I appreciate
Well, if
that.
I talk long enough, I'll hit the truth.
You'll find something. The truth will come around.
You'll all notice that our buddy Divine is not with us. We're not sure if he's going to be joining us. He had a death in his family, so he has responsibilities, with all that he's dealing with. So we hope he will, but we certainly send our condolences to him and his family. And of course, the brains of the operation, pulling the strings in the background, is the fabulous Adrian Hatter. So thank you, Adrian, for joining us. Let's see now. For the benefit of those who are not familiar with what we do here on the Yard, we try to essentially simulate the kind of conversations that occur on any yard at any prison. It's generally a time when they let you out of your cell and you can get some fresh air. Some people choose to lift weights or kick around a soccer ball, but mostly you end up hanging out with your friends. So we're here tonight to hang out with one of our friends as well. Sometimes inevitably the conversation gets emotional. Sometimes it gets a bit heated. But generally on the Yard, there's a lot of laughter because people are in a good mood, because just for a short amount of time, maybe they can actually make believe that they're still a human being and that there's life beyond their incarceration. We are very sensitive to the fact that we don't want ever for a guest to feel like we're laughing at him or her or exploiting their situation or anything like that. We do laugh sometimes because, as our friend Divine so eloquently put it a couple of months ago, we laugh because there are no more tears to cry. So I hope that we'll be laughing tonight, and I hope you'll be amused as well. let's see. Our guest tonight, this is a really interesting evening for us because, we always have, all of our guests have done time. That's sort of the requirement. And some of them have done a lot of time. Some of them had life sentences that they served 20 or 30 years of. Some of them, many of them on average probably spent 10 years in prison. Our guest tonight, however, did spend some time in prison, but not a whole lot of it, which sort of makes him an interesting case study for us to chat with. He was a standout scholar at Harvard University, but he got involved in some kind of insider trading trouble, allegedly.
Not allegedly no more.
Allegedly. Well, I always give everybody the benefit of the doubt.
Welcome to the yard.
And I hope that they
doesn't matter if it happened or not.
I hope they give me that benefit too, although I don't deserve it. But interestingly, according to our guest, he never made a penny from this alleged crime.
No, I did. I made like 10, like a very small amount.
Okay, well, you'll tell us about that in a second. He served as a staff writer on the Simpsons TV show, also on the TV show Blackish. So he's funny and creative and very bright. A friend of ours introduced us, and we knew he belonged on our team working with us, so we hired him prior to him going away to prison. He was sentenced to a 1 month sentence in federal prison. You heard that right, 1 month. And he just got out a little while ago. And the shortness of his sentence, I think, suggests an interesting take that he can provide. So everybody, please welcome Dom Sonoiki. We call him Dom. Dom Allaire is his full name. Hey, Dom, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm definitely excited to join. It's nice to be, like you said, it was pretty brief, but it's still, it's.
Well,
it's
we're
nice
gonna.
You're on the yard now, my man.
Yeah, we actually we're on the yard for an hour and a half, which is almost as much time as we did, so we can sort of simulate it in real time.
I knew that was going before you even went there.
I just got my headset. So just to sort of kick things off, Dom. Why the hell did the feds even bother with a 1 month sentence, do you think?
Well, I think the judge, she just felt that, so the counterparty, the person who I, tipped off, she gave him a 1 day sentence, which apparently is, you go, the marshals take you down until basically you go to sentencing, and then after the sentencing, the marshals take you down to, basically you hang out for 4 hours until 5 p.m. or maybe even a little earlier if they feel
like the drunk tank.
Yeah, basically. So she gave
you speak
a 1 day sentence.
Sounds like so.
Yeah, I've seen a drunk tank.
So Dom,
field trip.
I asked you before we went on, are you comfortable talking? Is there anything you're not comfortable talking with? And like most people that come on the yard, you said, no, I'm sort of an open book. So we appreciate that. Could you sort of very, very briefly talk about what happened after Harvard? You had a couple of very interesting jobs. What happened with this guy where you got in trouble?
Right. Well, it's hard to keep it very brief, but I'll try and give the 3 minute, however long explanation. So basically, I moved, I moved to Houston, my mom and I, from Nigeria when I was 6. And, Africans are pretty similar to Asians in the whole tiger parenting stuff. So it's always about, good grades, you're going to be a lawyer, doctor, engineer, a very stable job. And so I ended up, I was really good at school. I wasn't very, much good at anything else. I wish, I would love to be good at basketball, but I didn't have self coordination and height.
We still haven't been able to play yet. We gotta put that together soon, for sure.
Yeah.
Now
So
now you're lean, mean, trim too.
I lost. But yeah, I was always so the one thing I was the one thing I was good at was school. I wasn't good at getting girls or basketball or anything like that. And so I was and I remember growing up, like the DARE, the drug awareness resistance education, they would come and they would scare you about smoking weed. I was terrified of drugs because I thought, like, I'm not handsome, I'm not funny, girls don't like me, I'm not good at sports. All I've got is this, and so I was great at school, and I ended up getting into all these, I went to prep school, I got to all these top schools, got into Harvard. And when I got there, coming from my background, I thought, okay, well, I want to make money, not coming from, you're surrounded by all these people who are kids of billionaires and, their dad, I remember went to school, all the kind of Black kids, especially the ones from, different, less privileged backgrounds, we all kind of flocked to Wall Street. We came to Harvard, day one, you want to be Barack Obama, you want to change the world or whatever. And then day two, you're like, okay, where's Goldman Sachs? That's how I'll change the world. And so,
see the light.
Or, everyone's half kids want to be doctors and they take one science class and like, okay, that's not going to happen. Then, or you want to change you want to change the world. And you see that your first year analyst at Goldman makes $80,000 a year base, and then maybe another $60,000 bonus. You come from a household where your mom maybe makes 20%, 30%, 40%, whatever. Not that I really knew how much my parents made, but I knew that we weren't. When I was hanging around with these kids who a classmate of mine, her dad bought the Scream, the painting, the Scream, for I think well, let me see. He bought the Scream.
Edward Munch.
Edward Munch for $120 million. Then, you would meet the kids who are doing really interesting things, like they're going to, backpack across Europe for the summer, or they're going to go live on a farm. And you see, I remember one girl I talked to, she's like, oh, I'm going to, do something, different. And her dad was Elliot Spitzer, or the former governor of New York. Or another kid I was in class with, she was really eccentric. She had a pet pig, and one break she got caught busted shoplifting, and it turned out her dad was Rudy Giuliani. So it was a huge story because Rudy Giuliani is really tough on crime. So these are the kids I was going to school with, and I was like, I gotta go make money. So I worked on. I was a freshman. I worked on at Morgan Stanley my freshman summer, and they were just kind of like, having a freshman intern in investment banking was kind of like a novelty. They didn't really give me much to do. I was just kind of furniture. And then my sophomore summer, I was at Goldman Sachs, and they were like, hey, sophomore, junior, we don't care. We're going to work you like, you're going to get a real experience. So, I was there until the whole classic investment banking thing of you're there until 2, 3 in the morning, on Excel spreadsheets and stuff. And so when I was at Harvard, I got really into this organization called the Harvard Lampoon, which, if you've heard of National Lampoon, it's a spinoff of the Harvard Lampoon, which is this humor magazine, and like Conan O'Brien was on it, and like all these folks who write, the big TV shows back then, The Office, 30 Rock, Parks and Rec, and even like, so half, about a quarter to half of all their writing staffs, let's say a writing staff is 10 to, 12 to 18 people for each of those shows, anywhere from like 4 to, half, basically a quarter to half of the staff is from Harvard, the Harvard Lampoon. And so I remember there's this guy, there's a show called Master of None on Netflix with Aziz Ansari. And there was this guy named Alan Yang who'd written for the Lampoon. And he wrote for Parks and Rec, which Aziz Ansari, he's this comedian, he's this Indian guy, he was on Parks and Rec. And so Aziz Ansari was, Parks and Rec was
Tom,
yeah.
Let me just interrupt you for a moment here.
Yeah.
We really want to talk a little bit about the criminal justice system here.
I haven't heard this part though. I'm fascinated by.
No, it's very interesting. Who doesn't like talking about Hollywood and Harvard? But
he's getting to the juicy stuff. He's getting to the meaty.
Yeah, and I guess. All right. So basically, I started realizing, hey, do I want to basically be sitting on a Excel spreadsheet at 3 a.m, or do I want to be, this guy Alan Yang? I remember I would look at his Facebook, and he's hanging out with, he's just, living the Hollywood dream. And I thought, okay, that seems a lot more fun than, being on, not having a life, working 100 hours a week, being an Excel monkey. And so I kind of, but like I said, I came from this background, so I didn't want to, jump straight into that because of how risky it is. And so I thought, okay, I'll work on Wall Street for 2, 3, maybe 4 years, save up a big, nice cushion, and then I'll go out and try this Hollywood kind of, thing. And so that was kind of my master plan. And so right before graduation, and obviously this is very weird to talk about, but right before graduation, days before, I found out there are these allegations of misconduct, of sexual misconduct against me. And they were so kind of, something that I just never even heard before, like that I'd never been in any trouble my whole life. And so when I found out what the allegations were, I was like, okay, well, this is pretty ridiculous. And I know that I didn't do anything wrong. But unbeknownst to me, a court system, which can be, as unfair as courts can be, you have like kind of a bunch of rights, and there's evidence, there's a bunch of rules, and there's kind of a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. A private school, an institution can, they can kind of do what they want. It's kind of, there's no laws that govern, Harvard is its own law. And so I, pretty quickly realized that at some point, like I wasn't gonna get my degree. And so, at first I wasn't too worried about it, because I thought, okay, I've already completed all the requirements and I'll figure it out. But about a year into post-graduation, it started to really affect my professional life, where my company, the Goldman Sachs, like, hey, what's up with your degree? And I got this really, really huge, this insane hedge fund offer. Not as insane as the type of money Richard was making, but, like a hedge fund, pretty good money. And it got rescinded because they were like, hey, we went to your background check. I tried to let them know ahead of time, and miscommunication. So they said, hey, we're rescinding this offer. This was life-changing sort of thing. And so I became really, really upset, really depressed about, how things had turned out, and started to really, really freak out, because, I'd be reading these articles about students who have been in similar situations where, when a school says doesn't give you your degree because of the situation, you can't really transfer elsewhere. You can't complete your education. It kind of just puts you in a bind. And so around this time, I read that a lot of students were suing their institutions and winning because these situations were so blatantly unfair. And so I thought, okay, I'll have to sue. And you need a mountain of money, a pretty large amount of money to sue a place like Harvard. And so I thought, okay, well, I need some money, and I need it quick. Around this time, I met this football player who, he said, hey, I'm on my rookie contract. I'm supposed to get this big, huge payday when I sign my second contract, but at the moment, things are tough. And so he kind of was like, hey, like, athletes nowadays with LeBron James, they all want to be businessmen. So he said, hey, teach me about stocks, teach me about all these, real estate investing. And so I was, I fancied myself a stock market genius. And I started, hey, this is stocks, this is, and eventually he said, hey, wait a second, you know about things before they happen. Instead of just telling me about, buy Amazon, buy Apple, buy whatever kind of publicly available stuff, why don't you, give me a heads up about things before they happen. And at the time, I was just so twisted up about the situation with my degree, and with, how it was starting to affect my professional life, that I thought, okay, well, this is, it seemed like a good idea. So for a few months, I gave him, I said, hey, this company's about to get bought, that company's about to get bought. And, he, unbeknownst to me, he made $1.2 million on these, just small potatoes in Wall Street parlance, but still enough to get the feds excited, especially if it's a football player. And so, at the end of 2015, the feds knocked on my door when I was living in LA. I was writing for Blackish. And when the feds knock on your door, there isn't much they don't know. And so, but it didn't become public until summer of 2018. And so, I was writing for The Simpsons at that point. And then, I foolishly thought, okay, I'm a nobody. This guy's some huge football player. I'll be a footnote in this whole story, and my life will kind of go on. And instead, it became almost like we were treated equally, or even like, there's Harvard, Wall Street, Immigrant, Goldman Sachs, The Simpsons, Blackish, and then the whole sexual misconduct aspect. 2018 was kind of the peak of the Me Too movement. The Brett Kavanaugh hearings were happening. So I just became, Wall Street Journal, article about me, and Bloomberg, the insider trading odd couple, the meteoric rise and the, stunning fall of this, basically, my life got turned into a morality play for these, journalists. And when they do these stories, they call the person you sat next to in third grade. They call, and the only people who talk are the people who don't like you, because your friends say, hey, this journalist reached out to me. Are you okay? Or, I'm just checking in on you. How are you doing? people who don't like you, they're, you know, they love to talk to a journalist about things. So I basically just, you know, put my life on hold, and the sentencing kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed until July of this year. And then I got sentenced to this 1 month, and I went in there, lost 20 pounds, and, you know, came out, you know, and I'm on the yard.
Here you are.
Yeah.
So the sentence, your court appearance got pushed off to like 3
Yeah,
years.
COVID and other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, COVID. And so you had all of this stuff swirling around. That 3 years had to be pretty hellish, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, and in retrospect, it feels pretty foolish to, you know, put my life on hold for 3 years for, you know, for 1 month. But like, you know, it's so, when something's hanging over you, and, you know, it's just so hard to really, you know, you want to look for a job, but it's like, well, I'm getting sentenced in 3 months or 4 months. How do I, you know, how do you even be motivated to even look for a job when you've got this, you know, huge thing hanging over your head?
What do you say? I mean,
Yeah.
I've said this before, you know, when people ask me about advice about how to handle their indictment or conviction, I always say, go to prison as quickly as you can.
It's so funny to say that. It's so funny because recently someone asked me, I can't remember who it was I was talking to, and they were like, would you have rather, because initially my sentencing was early 2019. And they said, would you have rather gotten sentenced then and done like, you know, or when you got sentenced? I was like, I would actually have rather, you know, gotten 6 or 9 or even 12 months or whatever in 2019, just gotten out of the way, than having that 3 years of just like,
that was
interesting.
A big waste. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I got those 3 years. I just, you know, I didn't really do much, you know.
So you would have taken a longer sentence, but gotten it now with retrospect. Now looking back,
with retrospect, I would have much rather. I think it was early February 2019, and I would have just rather you know, give me, you know, whatever, and just get it out of the way. I think
so
3 years was terrible.
Yeah. This was a plea agreement that you made?
Yeah, I made a plea agreement. Yeah.
Okay, and part of the plea agreement was that they would only ask for a 1 month sentence. Is that how you understood it?
No, they don't give you. I mean, they don't. At least me, they said they couldn't give me like kind of a definite, you know, just kind of like, you help us out and we'll help you out sort of thing. But there's no kind of promise of as far as
So what were you expecting?
So my lawyer said that the judge that I got was he said that there are some judges I could tell you're definitely going to go to jail, and there are other judges I could tell you're definitely going to get probation, and she's just kind of like in the middle. And so
more ambiguity.
Yeah, more ambiguity.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of hoping for probation, but felt like, okay, I could, you know, I mean, the other thing though is that I didn't know this guy made 1.2 million until the very, very week before I got indicted. So the guidelines
share it.
Yeah, he gave me like $10,000. The guidelines were 37 to 46, you know, and so when I found that out, I was really, really, I mean, I was pretty, you know, shocked. You know, that's 3 to 4 years, and that's really, you know, terrifying. But
for those that don't know about the federal system versus state system or any of the sentencing stuff, like especially with white collar crimes, the federal system goes based on amount of loss, and so and they put all of these very interesting nuances on things sometimes, and that amount, you know, even though if the question, you know, the amount in question was one number, it tends to be a much bigger number later. And then they base your guidelines are, there's federal sentencing guidelines on what the amount of loss is and your previous history of, you know, arrest and incarceration, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's how they come to this range that most judges stay in. You know,
I mean, I think the loss amount should have been 0, because it turns out the guy, so the football player, when football season started, well, 2 things. When football season started, he was really busy with practice and games, so I couldn't communicate with him. So he said, hey, like, talk to my buddy, this middleman guy. And I think he was also trying to put a buffer between us. And so that guy ended up losing all the money. So I think the loss amount could have really been 0. But
let me ask you a question. Jane.
Casino always wins.
Just, you can't beat the
Yeah.
habit. Jane, who always has interesting, insightful comments and questions, she wonders, or she wonders to what extent, if at all, your federal insider trading case was informed by the sexual allegations that you had encountered before. Was there any overlap? Did they ever bring it up with you?
Oh no, they didn't. I think they kept it very separate. I think that they, because I worry about that too, that they might try and establish some sort of pattern of behavior. But I think that those allegations is very frustrating. They live in a different. I've never been arrested or charged. It sickens me to even suggest that type of stuff. Like it was kind of college hookup. Not that I want to get into it, but it's like that was a totally because it was a college administrative thing. So that wasn't that didn't come into play.
Okay, and the judge bring it up at sentencing?
No. Fortunately, it did not. It didn't come into play. Fortunately is a weird way to say because I didn't do it, but it didn't come into play. Yeah.
Yeah, 30 days probably didn't come into play.
Yeah.
How much less could it have been? All right. So when the judge said, "I'm giving you," Dom, you still there?
Sorry, I need to grab my charger. Sorry, I just don't want to. I don't want my phone to die in the middle of this. I'm sorry.
No, that would be bad for a guest. So you were standing in court. It's always a very lonely time when the judge is about to render the verdict, or the sentence, I should say. And she said, you get 1 month. What do you remember? What went through your mind when that announcement was made?
Well, it was actually. It sounds. I have a different perspective now. Obviously, now that I've been inside and seen the lengths that people, that how anomalous 1 month is, and how fortunate and blessed I was to get just 1 month. But at the time, the football player had gotten 1 day, and that happened a few days beforehand. And so when I saw that he got 1 day,
your sentence was 30 times longer, and you're like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, well, actually, it's like 180 times longer because 1 day is really just 4 hours. But so it's much.
You went through the math on this.
Yeah, and I did the math. You
don't
have much.
You really did some hard time there. So
no, but I think at the time I was under the impression, my lawyer had kind of because I think I was approached first, and so my lawyer had always kind of told me that the way it works is that whoever gets approached first, kind of first one in gets the best kind of outcome. And so I thought, okay, well, when I saw that he got because he's a professional football player, and the Eagles won the Super Bowl the year that this whole thing happened, and he was a starting linebacker, and so he it was on ESPN that he'd only gotten 1 day, or that he'd gotten 1 day, and so I thought, okay, well, that means I'm not getting any more than that. And I remember, my lawyer had always said that having a job really helps, which, that whole 3 years of me just kind of not working, I worked a little bit, in that time. But, my lawyer always said that having a job helps. And so I remember, I was working, I was working a couple of jobs, and so I thought, so the judge said, would your employer's mind, you going on a hiatus? And when she said that, I was like, oh, that was, I was just,
hiatus.
So
Hawaii? Sure, I'll go to Hawaii.
Yeah. So you got 1 month, and how much time was it in between when you were sentenced till you actually showed up in prison?
It was about a month. I think they gave me about 45 days, or they gave me a while to self-surrender. I think my sentence was July 29th.
And at that time, you were working with us. So
yes.
We were, kind of getting a bird's eye view of what you were going through.
Right. So,
yeah.
They,
Let me add this too, just because, so everybody watch, we are laughing at the time, and we know, Dom and us have known each other for a long time. Like, we work together. We love Dom. Like it's that type of thing. So we can joke. We'll get to this in a second, because as Dom tells the story about how the next steps go, et cetera, like it doesn't matter if it's one day, 1 hour, or anything. Like the process to get in is dehumanizing, is saying it nicely. And so like
Yeah, it
like
doesn't
I
matter
said,
how long you're going away for. It's the same uniform.
And well, I'm a comedy writer. I don't mind laughter at all. I don't,
no, for sure. I just want to make,
we've given you
yeah.
a lot of shit about it, because both Seth and I have done a little bit more time than that. But we're very happy for you,
Yeah, no,
We're just
know,
jealous. That's really what it is.
And I have to say, you lost a lot of weight.
Yeah.
So, on a certain level, we always talk about, was prison really all that bad?
Well, I lost a lot of weight, but I also lost a lot of money because I'd been trading crypto I've been holding some crypto. So that there was a huge dip when I was on. But
all right. So you were sentenced to a month, and where did you do the time?
So it was interesting. So I got sentenced to a month. I did it in FCI Bass. So I did 2 weeks in FCI Bastrop, and I did 2 weeks in Philadelphia, which is obviously like not normal. But I was basically, I don't know what the ethos here is. I know in the inside, snitches get stitches, and I grew up on hip hop. But they, there was the middleman guy, for whatever reason, the middleman guy was taking it to trial, and he, I pled guilty. The football player pled guilty. We both got filed informations, which is an indictment, but it's like an indictment, but it basically means that you cooperated essentially. And the middleman guy, for whatever reason, insisted on going to trial. So that's why it kept getting pushed back, because his trial kept getting pushed back. And then the sentencing did, and then COVID came, and then that added another year and a half, another year to it or so. But they moved me halfway through, because they're like, oh, we might want to call you to testify, and the trial is, the guy's trial is at such and such time. But I was in FCI Bastrop in Texas. That's where I lost the weight, because I didn't really eat for those 2 weeks. I would kind of nibble at something every now and then. And then halfway through, they woke me up, and they said, "Hey, you're getting released." And I was like, "I'm not getting released." They're like, "No, they're outside. They're outside. Like you're getting, get your stuff." And I was like, "Are you fucking with me? Are you messing? I don't know if you can curse here, but
you can say fucking with me on the yard. Yeah,
you're a jailbird.
Yeah, well, I was like, we can go back and edit that out. But are you messing with me?
I ain't no editing this, man. This is raw.
He was like, I was like, are you messing? He's like, no, they're outside. Like they're, and I was like, I was like, well, no, I got, you have your, even with my little measly month, you have the calendar you're counting down. And I was like, this just doesn't make sense. And so, but I thought, okay, I guess, maybe it's a COVID thing, or maybe, I've got some other days of credit, because it was going to be 30 days, and then I got 4 days. Yeah,
you've been the model inmate for 2 weeks, and then
yeah. Well, because I had 30 days, and I ended up having.
All right. You don't need to go down this road.
Yeah, they gave me so anyway. So I thought I'm leaving, and then I go down to receiving and discharge, and they're like, the guy there isn't acting like I'm leaving. Like he's like, okay, all right, here's your stuff.
He's the important one.
Yeah.
He's like, I had this mountain of books because I've been reading. I was in quarantine. You can't leave the cell. I can only leave the cell Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for about 10 minutes to shower.
Yeah.
At all. So in the first 5 days, I didn't have a cellie. So I was just, I just read nonstop. So he was like, okay, your books, we'll send that, we'll ship that to your home. I was like, whoa, where am I? You're gonna ship that home? Like, where am I going? He's like, no, there's a federal writ. And I just started, my mind just starts racing. Like, oh my, are they gonna slap me with some more charges? Like what's going on? And I was pretty freaking out. But it just turned out they wanted to transfer, move me to Philly, because they wanted me around, and in case I guess they wanted to call me as a witness.
Okay.
We talked about that before too, like before you went in, about it's easy to get in, right? And sometimes it becomes hard to get out. and people go in with short time, and something happens inside, and they get wrapped up into something else.
I got
and
really
you
scared. Yeah, I got really. Cause I watch like a ton of Dateline, and there are always these cases where like they find someone, they like someone does, it's like the people who do the family, the gene tree, and it's like you submit your DNA, and like your random great uncle gets locked up for he killed a hooker in 1976, and so I'm just like, crap, did I like bleed somewhere? Like is my, they're gonna like try and are they gonna put some more, they're gonna add some other trading, but they just moved me. But they handcuffed me. And I got transported on American Airlines. Got to skip security, which was pretty nice.
You went on American Airlines?
Wow.
Yeah, they flew me. It was like a flight.
You told me you flew, but I thought you were on Con Air.
No, they came and the feds came and picked me up because they said that it would take too long if I went, on Con Air, because like they wait for you to. It would take months. So they came and picked me up. They got me some, I got a breakfast sandwich, so I got to eat some real food.
That's nice of them, man, because usually they don't care about when you're in diesel therapy. They don't give a shit about how long it takes for transit. What your sentence is or anything like that. You're in
what
transit.
the
You're gone.
distance is.
Yeah. They
said
said
weeks to go 100 miles.
Yeah. So I was walking. I was handcuffed, but they threw a sweatshirt over my hands. It was a morning flight, so no one really, no one could really notice. And then we got to skip security and stuff. So we sat in the back of the plane.
Did you have a drink on the plane?
No, just a while. The only funny thing is that we were in the back row, me and the two FBI agents. There's another guy in the back row, and the flight attendant, he wanted to just be us, us. He said, so the other guy, he's like, hey, I think your wife's up there. Like, I'll put you, I'll see, he's like, nah. He's like, no. He's like, no, I'll put you next to you. He's like, no, I'm trust me. Like, I'm. So we're like, hey, this is no problems, going on. Like, he was adamant about not being seated next to his wife. He was like, I'm fine. I'm fine back here.
So I'm intrigued. It doesn't sound initially like you had too much contact with other inmates, with other people, but the contact that you did have or the contact with guards, what did they make of the fact that you had such a short sentence?
Well, I didn't really advertise it, for certain reasons, but I had a cellmate in Texas. He was a 54-year-old Mexican guy who had, he went on the run for like 12 years, and he was really, he let me use his radio. He actually bought me a radio, let me use his sriracha, which made some of the food edible. So he and I talked quite a bit. Like, he and I opened up to him that I had this short sentence, and he was just intrigued by it. I think it was more, the guards were mostly intrigued, and I didn't really, especially in Philly, Philly, Austin was a low. It was an FCI basketball. It's a low. Philly was the MDC, the federal FDC. So they had, I was the guy I talked to the most when I was there. He killed 7 people, and there were a lot of folks who.
All right, so let's talk about that. Chances are at Harvard, you probably didn't meet too many mass murderers. Is that fair?
Well, it wasn't a single incident. He charged 25,000.
He killed 7 people, however it happened, right? Yeah. Still, that's the important thing. And he was doing a lot of time for it.
Yeah. Well, not that much. He snitched. There was this rap gang. This rap group was a drug operation. They really wanted to get the rap group. So I think he might get out. He might only get 10 years. He's like 4 years in. I think they gave him like maybe a 10-year cap. And like they took all his murders and put them in from the state and put them federal.
But the point is you were aware of what landed him in trouble. Yeah. And did you ever consider, like I often have, through my work and going to prison, and I'm sure Seth has had the same experience, and Divine certainly too. We've ended up meeting lots of guys and lots of women, as a matter of fact, who have committed murder. And growing up, I never imagined that I would ever be talking to people who committed murder. And if I thought of, anything about people like that, I'd be petrified. And then it turns out I've met many, many of them. And I have to say, as a group of people, they were some of the nicest, sweetest.
Yeah, he was really, right? So he was very nice. I will say, I grew up in, it's weird. I didn't grow up in like my parents always get mad because anytime, back when I was doing well and when I kind of, did poorly, anyone who ever wrote about me would go, I'm, this immigrant from like an impoverished background. I didn't grow up, impoverished. but we didn't live in like the greatest neighborhood. So 4 kids I grew up with have committed murder or have been in prison for murder. Like even just yesterday, one of my childhood friends, we had been writing, he got life without parole for murder. He didn't pull the trigger, but felony murder. And I met his son last night who looks just like him, and so I did have like growing up, a few kids I went to middle school with and a couple of childhood friends that did commit murder, but not 7 people. So it was, it was funny. He was really, he was probably the most interesting person I met inside because he was so kind of workmanlike about it. Like he was just kind of like he's like I'm not proud of it. Like he's not proud of committing murder, but he was almost like proud that he was good at his job. Like he committed murder for hire. He was kind of like the hired. He said
it was very matter of fact.
Yeah, he said 5 of the murders were he was paid for, and then 2 were his quote. He said his personal ones, and wow. But he was very kind of, it was weird. He's like, yeah, I'm not, well, he wasn't proud of it, but he did have like a huge Grim Reaper tattoo across the belly. And he had another Grim Reaper tattoo on the arm. So maybe he wasn't that not proud about it, but he kind of took pride in like that he got the job done, that like basically if you gave him a name, that person wasn't going to live. And he even, he said that, and I was like, kind of like, how did you do it? And he said like, well, he would kind of, and it's all, he's copped all of it. He's, he's a well-known snitch in the rap world, sort of, or at least in that city. Or I don't want to say snitch, but because it's a pejorative, but he's known. And he said that you give him a name, he can find kind of a phone number, a phone bill, he can find an address. And like, let's say you live at, whatever apartment, whatever building, whatever house, he'll put maybe a toothpick in the door and a toothpick in the keyhole. And so that extra 5 seconds it takes for you to, you pull out your key, you try to stick it in. There's a toothpick there, you got to remove the toothpick, and he'll, he said he's giving, all headshots, no torso, no legs. And he was very matter of fact about it. But he was also, we talked about Cam Newton, getting cut by the Patriots. That was the genesis of our conversation was we're both watching, ESPN, and he's a really big Broncos fan. And he's like, I know it's weird, so yeah.
So tell me, you had expectations. You certainly had enough time to think about it. You had expectations of what it would be like, initially what you might have to go through, like Seth was describing, and then actually to be there, albeit for a short amount of time. What surprised you most about the actual experience versus your expectations?
Seth gave me a very good kind of, this is what to expect. And so even though I didn't have a ton because I was in quarantine in both places, I could leave the cell very, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for a few minutes to shower in Texas. And then Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday for like half an hour rec time in Philly. Although a couple of times they let us out for a little bit longer. But I think I think it's all colored by the fact that I was there for so, briefly. But I think just a couple of things that stuck out to me were, well, in Texas, the food was awful. In Philly, it was surprisingly good. I can't tell if it was good because the bar at Texas set was so low, or if it was actually good. But I think it was actually kind of pretty good. And I think that the biggest things were, you just feel very like it's dehumanizing, right? Like I remember Seth said someone's going to look up your butt. That didn't happen in Texas, but in Philly, he's like, hey, like, drop your trowel and like kind of, bend over, make sure you're not,
yeah, we got it.
So like, that's dehumanizing. And the
Can
fact
you describe
that,
it a little deeper for the
yeah, no. And I think like even I'm sure, I don't know if I think that there are people who it's easy to think, well, I'm kind of different because I'm a white collar, that it's I'm not like a violent offender, but especially at the FTC, but even at a low, they're not, especially I'm a big black guy, they're not going to look at me and like, they're not going to look at me any differently, right? They're not going to say, oh, this guy's I'm sure, I don't know your experience, but I'm sure that
but
trust me, I'm a big white dude and they didn't look at me any different either. So I think everybody's the same.
What did anything surprise you is what I'm asking.
I think just like some of the people, how, normal, like I think like some of the stuff was just like how one bad decision can just screw up your whole life. I think that because like I think look, when I was in Philly, there were people who were career criminals and just kind of like, I mean, it wasn't a low, it was a serious place, and so they were kind of like real, the guy who killed 7 people, a lot of drug offenders. And Philly has a whole situation where the local, like basically the local DA is like a real progressive, soft on crime, and so then the feds or the US, the AUSA there is very, especially under Trump, was very much making a name by being tough on crime because he's running for governor, and so they were like real career kind of criminals there. But I think the 2 biggest things were just kind of like the people who usually feel like it's like you just kind of got not screwed, but like it's just you realize like one, especially with the federal guideline system where it's kind of like it's not arbitrary, but it's just kind of like they're like, okay, well, you got 2 points because you're you have a
so, but what's the wind up here?
So I met a guy who he was looking at 7 years because he went on a George Floyd protest and like he torched, he and a couple of guys torched a car and they got caught on they got caught on video. And it's like, yeah, you shouldn't torch cars, you shouldn't torch state vehicles. But like, you just wake up one day and you're riled up. You're like, hey, let's go to a protest. And you end up, you're sitting in a cell a year later.
What is the point that you're making about this stuff? I
think just like if you realize that like any, like one kind of bad decision can just screw up your whole life, I mean, in my case, I think
it's a valid point.
That's what I was hoping you would get to.
That is
the whole nature of morality. And with the prison I was in, there were some bad guys there who had done time, and now that they were at their end of their sentence, sort of, and they were on the way out. But for the most part, they were people, particularly young men of color, who had just made one mistake. Typically, when they were young, when people do stupid things when they're young kids, it's inevitable. And I really gave me pause to think about, this sort of absolute morality that, they weren't bad people. They weren't really different than anybody else. They just screwed up once and they didn't have a father who could get them out of trouble. And, I really just felt like this idea of morality, that was what really changed my thinking, is sort of considering that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it's the idea of like, a lot of things just aren't really fair, it just like, I mean, the guy who was doing he's, not sentenced yet, but like who was looking at 7 years because he torch, it's property, it's replaceable. And he didn't like wake up that day planning to torch it. He just, like a buddy probably texted him like, hey, let's go downtown, there's a protest. And he walked by the car, maybe one guy threw, and it's like now a year later, you're sitting, because the feds scrubbed through social media and looked at the, enhanced your image. And now you're sitting at you're like, and they didn't give him a bond, and that was just so, and I think that I had been kind of caught up, in like, maybe I'd been watching too much Fox News, but I remember thinking like, I was watching stuff that said everyone's like, oh, they're trying to hang the 1-6 rioters, but they let all the George Floyd people, off the hook. And this guy I'm like, this guy's looking at 7 years because, he got caught up in a moment. So there was no, yeah, it's just, there was a guy who was looking at, who got sentenced to 25 years, and he was, like his crime was pretty terrible, but he was like 51, or he was old enough that he felt that he was going to die in prison because he said, look, I've got another 15 years. My dad died at 62 of a heart attack. I'm, 51, basically I'll be 66 when I get out. My dad died at 60, whatever. And his story, I mean, it's tough because his crime was not good, but he said that he was a tennis instructor, and like he would go on the road and like go on these trips with, instructing students. And he and like a student, who was 15 at the time, like he ended up, and that's really, really awful, terrible. And, 25 years is appropriate, but you just look, it's like this guy probably, like one, I mean, I don't know if it was prolonged or not, but like that lack of judgment, because look, you should say like, he was making all these excuses, which made it very hard to, made it impossible to kind of empathize with him. And you could tell like he just hadn't owned his you have to have ownership over your mistakes, so they're gonna own you. And he was making all well, she came on to me, but it's like, that even if that's the case, like you as the tennis instructor, as the older person, should have the kind of, you're supposed to say no, And so him having that, whatever you want to call it, weakness, that lack of judgment, that's his life is over. That's 25 years, and he's gonna die in prison. And in prison, he's a chomo, right? So he's not. Right. That's called. And so he's not gonna. It's.
Did you talk about ownership, and that's a good piece too, and you've owned your stuff and your involvement and et cetera. And did you learn that inside? Did you see it before? Was that during the 3 years? Like,
I think over the 3 years, and I think inside, I did a lot. I read like a book a day almost, like when I could. When I got moved, I had to leave a bunch of books. I had people send me books, and like in quarantine, you can't leave the cell, so like all I could do was really read. And when I had a cellie, I listened to the radio. But that was
it sounds like quarantine's worse than the shoe. Like at least in the shoe, you get out for an hour.
Yeah, it's you don't get out at all, and so the time moves like a snail. And so I think I did read like I had I think that I had friends who were kind of giving me some advice like beforehand, and I think I read a book called "Can't Hurt Me" by this guy David Goggins. He's like a kind of like a military guy and like a kind of crazy workout like ultra marathon runner. And I think that like there are some. I think that you have to kind of I guess you have to kind of own you're the common denominator in everything that's happened to you, so you kind of have to own whatever has happened. And I think for a long time I kind of like looked at it like, well, this whole thing, and I guess I still to this day look at it a little bit like that, like, oh, had this thing at Harvard not happened, I would have, but it's like, yeah, that's probably true factually, but like, I could have gone to like Morehouse and done like done an online program, or I could have just waited it out, if I just kind of kept my head down at Goldman for another year.
So the situation was such that you felt you were under a lot of pressure to do something, and as a result, that's typically how a lot of people get in trouble.
But I think that you have to kind of, another person could have been in that exact same situation and wouldn't have, resorted to insider
or done worse.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Or done worse. That's true. Or done worse. That's
whatever.
And Dom, did you like? So it sounds like you learned that kind of piece beforehand, because I'll say, like, for me, like I served almost 5 years total, right? And I didn't learn my lesson till about 2.5 years in. I didn't really. It was everybody else's fault. It was the IRS. It was this and this and this and blah 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 blah. Right, which is all bullshit. And like you said, until we own our stuff, like nothing ever changes, right? And but it took me a while to get there, and I was already down for a while. Like it was, I was still upset, and with that, but that you learned that during that, pre-prison time period, or was that something that like?
Yeah, I think I learned it maybe like a few years. I think a few years in, or I think during that pre-prison time. But I think it really kind of like resonated in prison. But I think that like I used to get really, really caught. I had a friend who's like a really good kind of advisor, confidant, and I used to really get hung up, and I still do a little bit, on the past, right? On like, oh, like if only I had, if I hadn't gone out on this random night and had this kind of random, consensual hookup, or if only I hadn't, if only I had, if only I'd used a VPN, if only I'd used.
So is that okay? This is very interesting to me, because you were talking about ownership, but now what you're describing is you were sort of a victim of circumstances that could have. That you were just sort of like a little ping pong.
He's just saying, what if I made different decisions?
I'm saying that's how I used to think before.
Wasn't there? I mean, I thought about myself, so I shouldn't be imposing it on you. But being in prison gave me an opportunity to really recognize certain character flaws I had.
Well, yeah, exactly. So that's why
that I wasn't proud of, and weren't healthy, and weren't good for the world. And sure, we could all say, well, if I hadn't gone to that meeting on that day, if I whatever, things would have been different. But ultimately, the trouble I got into was a function of me being fucked up. basically.
Well, yeah. So I guess what I was trying to get to. So I feel like for the first, let's say that this thing, let's say from 2013 onward until maybe like 20 some at some point in 2020-ish, or some point in the past 6 to 12 months probably, for the first, from when it was just the Harvard thing, I used to just think, if I hadn't gone out on such and such night, or if I'd immediately retained counsel as opposed to just kind of having this naive, like, well, I didn't do anything, so of course this, campus thing is gonna, reveal that. So and then when it was the other thing, I thought, well, crap, if only I had used, better operational security, like, burner phones, or if only this guy hadn't done it in such large amounts, or if only, I thought of all these circumstantial, like, oh, if only this thing, or if only that thing. And I think after a while, like, you have to kind of own your role in all these things, right? Like, own that it's not circumstance, because like I was saying a few minutes ago, a million other people could have been in that exact same circumstance and just said, okay, well, you know what, like, I'll go, maybe I'll just go straight to Hollywood. Maybe I don't have to do this Wall Street thing, or maybe, or hey, get approached by a guy and says, hey, teach, give me some tips, and say, are you out of your freaking mind? Like, even, no matter how kind of upset you are about other things, you would kind of, someone in that same circumstance might have said, well, what are you talking about? Like, of course not. I may be down, I may be, stressed out, but I'm not going to do that. It's against the law. It's also really stupid. So I think, a lot of people could have been, you can't blame circumstance, because a lot of people could have been in those circumstances or have been in those circumstances and didn't do that. And I think also the other issue when you blame circumstances, I got hung up on a lot, is that you can't really move forward. You can't really, because you're just constantly replaying and replaying and replaying, like,
right. Exactly. Some of your work with us involved talking to people who were looking for jobs who had records.
Right.
And Steph and I have talked about this very, very, frequently, that the people who seem to move on with their lives are ones who, take ownership completely. They don't have excuses, and they're able to look someone in the eye, a potential employer, for example, and say, it was my fault. I fucked up. I made big errors in judgment. I've learned from it, and I'm ready to move forward. Give me a second chance.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of the reason that during that, from end of 2018 to beginning of till beginning of 2020, beginning of 2021, really, I was I had money coming in from like other stuff, but like I didn't really work outside of like 2 months in 2020. From end of August 2018 until beginning of January 2021. I didn't really work much outside of those. I think I was so hung up. Aside from the whole like sentencing getting pushed, I think I think there are two things that happen when you blame circumstance. One is that you don't obviously you just don't take ownership, and so you keep making the same mistakes because you think it was just circumstance as opposed to like it was a flaw within yourself.
Choice. Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that like what was my biggest hang up a lot is I just kept kind of getting replaying. Like, if only I had done this, if I had just done this or that. And I think once you're kind of constantly replaying that stuff, you can't really move forward. Like a friend of mine, one of the best advice I got was from a friend of mine who said, he's like, you got to, beat Tom Brady. And he would say, look, when Tom Brady throws an interception, he thinks about it for 10 seconds and then he moves on the rest of the game. Sure, exactly. And I think that like, Tom Brady doesn't sit there and just beat himself up like, crap, why did I throw that interception? If only, if I had done that interception, like I'd be, the score would be this, and then I would be that, and like if only that that interception just constantly kick himself, because then you can't keep playing the game.
They don't do this. They don't do this much anymore. But like especially playing basketball, everybody wears rubber bands around their wrist, right? Like, and a lot of people don't know this, but it's because of that short memory. That's something in sports that you're trained to have, right? So you're bringing up Tom Brady, right? And you go, okay, there's nobody bats 1,000, right? Nobody shoots 100%, from the field, nobody never throws a bad pass or whatever, right? So you like part of it is learning how to lose and quickly and get through it and learn from it and go on, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest way, like, so for example, like when I saw that my guidelines were 37 to 46 months for the first time, I there were a couple plan. I had a plan. I had two kind of quick plans. My first plan was I'm gonna buy like some, because I was making a pretty good amount on The Simpsons. I was like, I'm gonna buy some really nice house in LA, and like I'll have someone manage it while I'm, if I'm gone for 3-4 years, have someone manage it as an Airbnb or something, and then like what that'll bring an income. But then you worked in real estate. I think you have to do with they need 3 years of tax returns and these documents. I didn't have time for all that. And then my plan B was like, I bought cryptocurrency as early as 2013, but I'll get impatient, or just for some dumb reason, I'll sell it. And, I'll, and then 6 months, a year, 18 months later, it's like 10 times. So I thought, well, if I'm gone for 3 or 4 years, I can't sell, which is actually wrong, because a lot of people have phones in prisons and camps apparently. But, I was like, okay, well, if I'm gone for 3 years, I can't sell. But, so I'd stocked up in 2018 and 2019, and because I wasn't working, I had sold and sold and sold and sold. And I think, a lot of times this whole kind of be Tom Brady thing, one of the better examples I think of is like, you'll meet somebody and they're like, crap, like someone told me about Amazon or something, 2 years ago. I'm like, crap, and there's like, and it's like, well, okay, like nothing's stopping you from kind of
can't change it. Yep. What are you gonna do now?
It's like this whole time that you've been beating yourself up about some poor decision or some mistake from a few years ago. You could have been, using big crypto as an example. You could have been doing something else. You could have been starting over. You could have been, and so the time you're occupied, kind of kicking yourself, and it's just time.
Part of the slate of character flaws, if you want to call that, I know for me, was lack of patience, wanting immediate gratification, and I've often thought, if I just gave it more time and let things happen, it probably would have really worked out a lot better. But I needed, like you, to trade. And with 2 days where it's gone down or it hasn't moved up, I got to sell it and buy something else. And that is what has always drawn me to casinos or taking drugs. It's just needing sensory input. It's just needing to feel like you're alive.
Yeah, I feel, and that instant kind of, I've never really done drugs like that. That instant, like it needs to happen right now. And I think, like looking, and like I said, I try not to kick myself about past decisions, but it's like, so my graduation was May 2013. This hedge fund kind of gave me an offer and then rescinded it in May of 2014. And I started on Blackish in like a completely different career, making great money, having an amazing life in June of 2015. So that trading activity took place in like October, November, really, July, September, October, November 2014. And like, those 3 months where I was like freaking out and panicking, like my life is over, Goldman's going to fire me and I'm going to be homeless. And, I'm going to be, turning tricks on the corner or something. And it's like, I'm not going to do that, but it's
listen, no matter, don't ever get to that point, Dom.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a couch you can sleep on. You don't have to okay?
Dude, yeah, I gotta ask you a question, man. So I'm dying to know this. So you're a smart guy, right? Like, we all make poor decisions, et cetera, et cetera. We covered that. So there's this, like in your intelligence and, going, all right, I don't know what the hell's going to happen, in this process. I don't know what to expect, et cetera. Like, you talk to people that have gone through it before, right? You talk to me, Richard, you talk to other friends, you talk to other people like lawyers, you're getting different perspectives from everywhere, right? Who was right? No, I'm just kidding. But
you gave the best advice.
But B,
you freaked me out, which was good.
That was my point. No, that was my point, because I figured if you were nervous about it for that time, that you would, and I don't know if you're going to go in a general population or anything like that, but you would go, yeah. And one of the big problems that I've seen with people that have short time is they go, it's not a thing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just here for a second. Like, don't worry about it. And I'm like, you can lose your life that way. Quickly. You can never come out. You know what I mean? Things like that. So it was more out of love that I was trying to do that with you.
I'm sorry, Seth. You had more.
I just want, but I wanted to like, now that you've had the perspective of going through the process, like, what would you tell somebody, and B, was it better to know kind of and get different perspectives up front, or was it like, what, let's just go and do it?
No, I mean, it was definitely better to get perspectives. I think that I had this kind of like, I was like, oh, I mean, people on the internet make a camp seem like, oh, it's just like it's like a vacation, it's like a dorm.
Yeah.
They make, I thought, okay, I'm going to a camp, or oh well. And my lawyer said, okay, well, it's a low because of quarantine. But low camp, it's really not that different. And you said no, low and camp are pretty different. I think I would have gone in like thinking I was just going to like sleepaway camp, and it's like the whole stuff about respect and like the whole race stuff. I mean, like I didn't get to leave the cell much, but like the race stuff is like it was good to know that going in that people tend to kind of eat with and associate with their race. So that was very good to know because it just made me take it a lot more serious. So it was definitely good to know ahead of time. And then what was the first part? Again,
what would you now that you've gone through, what would you tell somebody, you know what I mean, that is
what's the best advice you would give somebody who's
I'd say get a radio. get a radio. That's probably
that's legit advice, actually.
So Jane, who always, every time I never can underestimate Jane because she always comes up with something more and more interesting. But she, we've talked on the yard a lot about how, oddly enough, many people actually get something positive out of their whole prison experience in ways they never expected. And Jane asks, do you believe, Dom, that your life is better for the experience that you went through now?
Yeah, I think it's not better for the kind of the global experience of like the whole, Harvard but I think that I am better, aside from the fact that I took this crypto hit for that month, I am better off as an individual, as a human being. I am better off that she gave me a month instead of a day. I think that so I think just being inside and not having, I'm addicted to my phone.
But what if you got nothing versus a month?
I think that like I wouldn't have learned my lesson because I have obviously lost a tremendous amount, but I think that it's a place you never want to go back to. I think that it's,
and yet many people do.
Yeah. And I think even just like something really small is like, count. So, there's a 10 p.m., there's a 10 a.m. count, the 4 p.m. count, the 10 p.m. And then there's a midnight, the 3 a.m. and I think the 5 a.m. And they would always, I'd be like kind of either half asleep or trying to sleep. And they shine, and it's like the sun. It's like the I mean, I don't know, like they could power, like they could solve global warming by like
the flashlight.
They're not very respectful in general.
I'm trying to sleep here.
Really? It's just like
stop jingling those keys.
Yeah, there's something just like dehumanizing about, or even like with quarantine they bring the food to you. Like you feel just kind of like a pet that's like very unwanted. Like a pet that like. It's like, okay, well, as long as this thing doesn't die, and not because I want it to live.
It's the bare minimum that they're going to do.
And not because they want you to live, but just because there's paperwork involved if you die. So it's like, it's like let's just do the bare minimum to kind of keep these people alive. And so it's pretty so I think that, and also just meeting the people inside who, like this Choma or whatever guy who got 25 years, or this George Floyd riot guy who got 7 years, and also like the actual career criminals, they were also just because they were so cavalier. They'd be like, oh yeah, my guidelines, I'm looking, they're offering me 84 months. And you're looking at them, you're like, you're like a 27-year-old guy. From talking to you, you said that you did 3 years, you've done 3 years, in some the state, you've done 3 years before. So let's say if you're 27, you've been an adult for 9 years. 3 of those years you were locked up, and now you're looking at 80, another 7, and they're just so blasé about it. And I'm just like, I'm here for my month, and I'm like, get me out of here. And these people, these kind of career criminals who, a lot of gun charges, robbery charges, stuff like that. And it's like, I'm looking, they gave me 60 months. I've been here for 24. And it's just like, it's like a lifestyle to them, and it's just like, like. That's almost just as scary as the guys who just made one kind of who made a mistake and that ruined their lives. So you never want to go back there, So I think I'm better off for that.
So if you knew somebody that was under the gun, needed to make some money, he was working at Goldman Sachs or some investment bank, and he confided in you, and he said, I need to get money, or my family, is in trouble. We need to raise money quickly or whatever. And he said, this is what I've been doing, and this is what I'm thinking of doing. Do you believe, is it absolute that at this point you would say, don't even give it a moment's thought, you can't do this? Or
I would say that. I think that I would. So I have a buddy, this friend who was like the B Tom Brady. He's like this, he when we were in school, he wanted to be governor and then president. So he was like the most cautious man I've ever met in my life. Like we would be talking, and he's like, "Hey, we're approaching a blind corner. Like, be quiet. There's a window open, 2 floors up, And he's the most cautious kind of guy that I know, and he's a very, very sharp guy. And he's always like, I remember I would tell him, I was like, hey, he would say, hey, don't take a picture of me, delete that picture of me where I'm drunk. And I'm like, dude, by the time, our generation's running for office, everyone's going to have drunk pictures and, a bunch of whatever mess out there. And he was like, no, well, it's just better to not have it. And, nowadays with like cancel culture and you see people getting fired for things from 20 years ago, I realized, okay, he was right. And so I think the fundamental difference in my view of risk and his view of risk is he's always just thought, well, what's the upside, right? I've always looked at it like, with insider trading, I thought, okay, well, they care about the the people doing, $500 million, $100 million. So I thought, okay, like the chance of getting caught is pretty low. But with something like that, you don't think about the chance, right? Because it's like playing Russian roulette with like, even if there's 100 barrels, you're not going to play Russian roulette because even in that 1 in 100 chance, you die, And so it's like, I think it's very like I've always thought of risk, I think, as like, what are the odds of getting caught? What are the odds of something happening versus like, tail risk, which is like, okay, like there might be a low probability of something happening, but then if the outcome of that low probability is that your life, is fatal, it's fatal, then it doesn't really matter if there's a, if there's a point, if there's a 0.01% chance. And then with insider trading, there really isn't, apparently, because they have these really sophisticated devices that can tell if you're, they can sniff it out. So yeah, I would say, and this, because I think, like there's, I think when you're in the middle of something, it just looks like it's going to last forever. I think when you're in the middle of a really harrowing, difficult time, it seems like it's just the end of the world. And like, you don't have the perspective that, life is pretty long and like, you can easily just make things worse. I think that like, I go back, like I said, like had I, not that I, again, like not being stuck in the past, but like, had I just kind of like said, okay, well, I'll figure things out. Things will work out. I have faith in myself that things will work out. I'm a smart guy, capable guy. Well, a year later, I was writing for some hit show, making just as much or more than I was at Goldman, and getting to hang out with a bunch of, people that I grew up listening to their music and, watching their movies and, working with, like Lawrence Fishburne and, things of that nature. And so it's like when you're in the middle of a storm, it just seems like the storm is never going to end. And so that's what I would tell that person is like, hey, like, no, like nothing, it's just not worth it. It's just very much not worth it.
You said something about when you're in it, you don't think it's going to end, because for whatever reason. I always knew that I was sure I was going to end up getting in trouble. And it was just a question of time, and I felt like I'm in too deep already. There's no way I can extricate myself from it. So I just might as well play it out. But, I always was waiting for the knock on the door, when the FBI, when the guys with, windbreakers, and guns come knocking at your door.
Yeah, I was the opposite. I was stunned when they came because I just thought I thought like, they were making the big insider trading cases you read about. It's like this, some, a pharmaceutical, someone say, $500 million, $100 million. I was like, I'm some idiot in, lower Manhattan, like this football player, $50,000, $80,000, and when they knocked, it was
the feds don't make business decisions. That's what it is. It doesn't. They'll spend 10 years building a case for $100,000.
I should have done some. I should have done some research. Because they are. A guy you might make $215,000, and if they can prove the case, so I would say. I would say don't do it. But I'd say if you absolutely must, like, you need to go through, like, I was reading the story about the guy who, the guy who Trump bombed to smithereens. I can't remember his name. Well, there are two guys, not the ISIS leader, but some other, this guy from Iran. And like, they like rotate, like cell phones like hourly. You know what I mean? Like they're you gotta have some sort of IT background. You gotta,
You can stick with don't do it.
Yeah,
you can stick with that. That'll be a good message moving
instinct
forward.
there,
Yeah.
Well, no, that's fine. I'm saying
go with your gut on that one. Your first answer was the right answer.
No, it is. I'm just saying if this hypothetical, if this hypothetical guy, I'm not saying for me.
Can't let it go.
I'm
Why
saying
do I feel like next time it's not going to be a month?
Oh no! Oh, trust me.
Don't do it.
I'm too much of a sissy.
You're not allowed to do it.
When I was in there, I said I'm never going to jaywalk again. It's not. I mean, I don't know if everyone on here has been, inside, and like, I was there for a measly 28 days, but I mean, it's, like, and there are all these signs there about like, hey, stop prison. People, the whole drop the soap thing. You're never sure if is it like a meme, is it real, is it not? But there are all a bunch of signs in there about, hey, if you see something, say something. So like, they didn't put all these signs up for no reason. You know what I mean? Like, right. And I did talk to a couple people who said, yeah, like they're, I mean, there was a story that when I was in Philly, an MS-13 member pulled a knife on his cellmate and gave his cellmate, fellatio at knife point. I mean, it's not a pleasant place. So trust me, I'm being facetious about, get a bunch of phones and VPNs. Don't do it at all. But yeah, it's not, it is not a place that you want to ever be.
Yeah. That's legitimate.
And as Sid mentions, it only gets worse, the second time, the third time, so.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm joking. No VPNs, no burner phones. Don't do it at all. Trust me, it is absolutely not it. Learn how to, write comedy. There are lots of ways to make money. And like, to me, I mean, in LA and maybe Miami, you do need a little bit of money to be comfortable. But in the vast majority of America, you can. I mean, you need that, like food. I mean, there's a lot of inflation right now, but you don't need a ton of money to kind of, be, find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, whatever your persuasion is. You do need a little bit of money for that, but you can be happy with that. You don't need to kind of risk your freedom for a Ferrari. You'll get to the same.
Don't do it. It's not worth it. Message delivered.
And it's not the right thing to do. And there's chipping away at your soul when you're doing something is wrong.
Right. You have to look over your shoulder for one of the most.
Exactly. You can't sleep at night and it's bad karma, so don't do it.
Hey, Don, did you, I got a question, but did you, so like we talk, there's a lot of studies and science coming out around kind of PTSD and reentry, et cetera, right? And like how the prison system affects you and, and messes it up. Like when I first got out, I learned to not sit with my back open to open spaces, right? Kind of like I am now, right? But in prison, like you don't know what's going on behind you, right? And you didn't see a lot of that because you were in quarantine. But are there like things that you've noticed now that you've been out for a couple of weeks now, and I mean,
it's more that I just kind of cherish just little like being
this water's so good,
taking a shower with a bare feet.
Taking a shower when you want and not being kind of like, hey, like let me make sure. It's more that I just cherish small things.
Well, we cherish having you back. I'm very, very happy you made it through and you lost weight and you still have a great smile on your face. And I can tell you, and anybody who knows you, you have so much talent and you're very, very smart. There's a million ways that you can make a lot more money than you'd ever make insider trading.
A lot less risky.
And a lot less risky, and really, I can attest to the idea is not to make the money; it's to keep the money. So that's something I learned the hard way. So in any event, we're very happy to have you back, and Thank you. I knew this would be very, very interesting, and you're a very interesting guy. Next week, we'll probably have somebody who's done a lot more time,
Right.
and their take will be a little bit different, but we really appreciate you joining us and being very open and honest, and we appreciate everybody who's joined us. Please come back next week. Please follow us, follow me, follow Seth, follow Divine on Instagram, on Twitter, wherever. We all respond and talk to people all the time. And I can tell you again, if you have ideas, thoughts, things we do right or wrong, I'd love to hear from you. Richard at commissary.club, or on social media, however, but all of your opinion means a lot to us and to me. So thank you so much. Adrian just put up a bunch of links. So
and the other thing too, just to mention is Dom's on Commissary Club. You can DM directly if you have other questions for him. Richard and I and Adrian and everybody's on Commissary Club
on iOS or Android,
and connect with us. That's the easiest way to reach out.
Go to commissary.club. We'll send you a link to download it. It's free. People are posting really cool stuff, and we're just sort of cranking up our official launch. We've been talking about it for a while, but it's coming soon, but already there's a lot of really interesting engagement. So thank you all. Be safe, and we'll see you next week. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Dom. It's good seeing you.
No problem.